Audio recording for this meeting has begun.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our event tonight, How to Organize an Event That Makes an Impact. I'm Joanna Nadeau. I work with scientists around the country as part of our work at the Center for Science and Democracy, upholding science-based policymaking. If you're with us tonight, I'm sure you're very well aware of the unprecedented attacks on science from the administration in Congress that affect our understanding of facts in general, our health, and the environment. You may also have joined millions of other people in standing up for science lately by writing to your elected officials, making calls, visiting your senators' offices, and more. We're here together this evening at a really critical moment in time to help you take your science advocacy and organizing skills to the next level by supporting you to organize a successful advocacy event. So, two big questions you may be thinking about: why an event and why now? Let me start with why now. With the 2018 midterm elections approaching, now is a critical opportunity to turn the tides and make science and science-based policies a priority with elected officials across the country while they're campaigning and trying to appeal to voters. If you need a reminder about why we need to engage in this election process and urge our elected officials and candidates to stand up for science, here are just three examples. First, did you know that the administration is going to announce any day a process to dismantle the historic fuel efficiency standards, the strongest climate policy that we currently have on the books? Also, right now, members of Congress are beginning to vote on the budgets of our science-based agencies like the EPA, Department of Interior, Department of Energy, NASA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. All of these are under consideration for the next fiscal year. And some in Congress and the administration are working to defund these critical agencies. So we need to show our policymakers and our candidates that we support investing in flood preparedness, clean energy, and scientific research that helps keep Americans and our environment safe. And a third example is the Farm Bill, which is currently moving through Congress as we speak, and as written would actually create food insecurity for millions of individuals and threaten local food and local farms. So, let's bring critical issues like this to the spotlight. Let's hold anyone accountable who seeks to hold public office to uphold science-based policies that are good for people and the environment. This is the moment they'll listen, so let's make the most of it. There will be a lot of public attention on the future of our democracy this summer in the lead up to the midterm elections, especially in August. That's when your members of Congress will be back in their home state, and those running for office will be out in the community talking to constituents. They may even be on the campaign trail asking for your vote, so this is your chance to tell them how you feel. And often the best way to catch an elected official's attention and motivate them to act on the policies you care most about is through a visible public action or event with other members of your community. Whether you invite your elected official to a community festival or event with neighbors and members of local institutions, organize a letter writing party and a letter drop-off at their offices, or put together a film screening or a teach-in to broaden the network of people who might take action in defense of science. What you do this summer will motivate your elected officials and members of your community to stand up for science. So whatever your approach is, we're here tonight to learn from two science advocates and experienced event organizers on key strategies for a successful event. First, we'll hear from Nora Sadik, the president of the Milwaukee area Science Advocates, who received her master's degree in environmental engineering from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Then we'll hear from Adrienne Keller, a PhD student in the Evolution, Ecology, and Behavior program in the Department of Biology at Indiana University, where she studies forest carbon and nutrient cycling. Adrienne is a leader of the newly formed grassroots organization Concerned Scientists at Indiana University and one of UCS's Science and Democracy Fellows. We'll give you a chance to share with us and ask some questions, and if you decide that you're interested in organizing an event, we'll make sure you have all the tools you need to be successful. Also, you would not be acting alone. Your event will be part of a nationwide mobilization effort called Science Rising, which is taking place in communities across the United States in the run-up to these midterm elections. You'll hear a little bit more about that later on. So, with that, Let me introduce you to my colleague, Liz Schmitt, Senior Outreach Coordinator for UCS's Federal Defense Team. Liz?
Thanks, Joanna. So I am going to talk you through a few of the key elements of what a really successful event. So as we are encouraging you to plan and host a Science Rising event, there's really 5 things to keep in mind, and you can think of this as your checklist for pulling off a really great event. Whether it's big or small, keep coming back to this checklist as you're planning during the day of your event, and also after it's all done to make sure that you're making the most of your hard work. So number 1, set a goal. Think about what you're trying to achieve. Are you focused on a policy that you're really passionate about and trying to make sure that candidates for your House of Representatives seat are talking about it before the election? Who are you trying to reach, and what do you want to tell them during your event? So really let your goal come first and the message within it, and let that drive your work each step of the way. If something's a nice idea, but it would resonate with a totally different audience than yours, or doesn't quite meet your goal, then save it for the next time. Number 2, build a compelling program, and again, make sure that your content matches your goal. So part of this is finding the best voices to speak at your event. People who have something compelling to say about the issue, who are great speakers, and are the right messenger for your audience. So for example, if you are trying to reach your senator and you know your senator is Catholic, then you might ask a faith leader to speak at the event to help better reach your senator. Think about the best format also. Maybe it's a panel of experts, a rally, a training on advocacy skills, or a teach-in on a particular science policy that you care about. Think about the tone of your event too. Make sure that it's right for the people that you want to come to it. Number 3, be inclusive. So as we all know, science and democracy are really for everyone. So your event should be too. And just realized that you all couldn't see my face, so hello. So really just encourage you to be inclusive from start to finish with who you ask to speak, who you involve in planning, who you're inviting to attend, and where you are spreading the word. Also try and be inclusive about the location. See if you can find a spot that is accessible for people with disabilities. If you know that you will have folks who are hearing impaired, maybe hire or ask for a volunteer sign language interpreter. Just think about ways to make sure that your event is open to as many people as possible. Key tip number 4 is to promote your event and recruit people to come. This isn't Field of Dreams. So if you build it, they won't necessarily come unless you put in some time to spread the word. One of the simplest ways that I find to be really helpful in recruiting people for an event is to make a public Facebook page for it. You can invite your friends and help spread the word that way, and then you can also track who's RSVPing. That's one simple way. Also think about who you know in your networks who is a really great connector. Who could help spread the word, or maybe post flyers on campus if you're a student or a professor, but make sure that you are planning far in advance and how you're going to spread the word about this and proactively encourage people to come. And remember that if you're doing a public event that's all about science advocacy, you can list it on sciencerising.org. And also my final tip on recruitment is the rule of thirds. You should expect that if you have a Facebook page and 100 people have RSVP'd, about 33 will show up. So always give yourself an extra cushion and expect about that many people to show up. And finally, the last but not least tip that I have for you is follow-up. So once your event is over, your efforts are not over. To really get the most out of it, you want to take the time to follow up. Thank anyone who was involved, obviously. Thank people who came up to the event. Follow up with whoever your audience was, and see if you can find out if you've met your goals. Maybe that means you've got a little survey for people to give you feedback during the event, or you ask people afterwards, hey, what did you think of that? if you had candidates come and speak at a forum or listen to experts talk about an issue, ask them, did it change their minds at all? What were their takeaways? And if you were really going towards a specific goal, let the folks involved know down the road how their participation helped make a difference. Let them know what the outcome was. Send some pictures of turnout for the event to everybody who came out, and really just kind of close the loop. And, you know, you may be open to things continuing further on too. Maybe the first event will spark more and more actions with folks in your community. And we hope that that will be the case wherever you are. So those are just some really basic 5 key takeaways to keep with you. And I know that both Nora and Adrienne will probably touch on some of these during their talks. So with that, I will turn things over to Nora.
Okay, I think that's a little bit better. Let's see. Okay, so thank you, Liz, for that introduction, and I'm really, really excited to see so many people on here. So one thing that I kind of want to talk about is, you know, when we start an event, a lot of times we're thinking about the really huge topic. So like climate change, public health, like these really large topics that we want to tackle, and it can be hard to really pull things from that are important and useful when creating a concise event. So I kind of listed 3 things that we use to help us when we're creating our events. So one thing that we do is we always create a shared note page that has the objective, our target audience, and then what we want our outcomes for the event. And one thing that I want to say going into this is it's always kind of changing and adapting, and that's okay. When you're choosing your target audience, don't just choose who you want to talk to. You really have to invest. So one thing that we have done in the past, so we've started a school program where we go to a few schools on Friday in the afternoons, and we do supplemental curriculum. And we couldn't just start that because we didn't have those connections. So a really huge part of creating that process was going to school conferences, was talking to teachers, going to when there were public school board committee events, really trying to get a head start in forming those relationships with those people who are really going to help you to hit your target audience. Because it's hard to say, oh, I want to reach children and not really know how. So really think about who are your connections in your community and start tapping those people way ahead. Start going to their community events, just so that way they have an idea of who you are. It really can help to create that relationship of trust. And Liz said a line I think that really hit home. Just because you create a perfect event doesn't mean that they will come. What it's really about is creating those relationships where people will come because they already know who you are and trust that you're invested. Another really key part of picking your target audience is understanding what is your communication strategy. So whether that's creating your event on social media, or right now we're working with a community where they really want us to create a poster, because posters in that community are really effective. And so we've worked with the there's a community it's a neighborhood association, and so they've provided us poster examples that we can kind of use and work with to create posters for what we're trying to create. They already, they're aware that people in their community don't really respond well to like computer-based kind of stuff. So it can be tricky if you don't know your target audience. Okay, I'm going to go to the next thing. So figuring out what is the outcome of your event. This one I really want to try to emphasize that it's okay if it changes. One really key part, and I'm going to pull this from what I just talked about with those relationships and connections with people, is you want those people to also have some input on what the outcomes are. And that's not to say that you don't have ideas. You should really come to people with your proposal as, you know, this is what a few of the outcomes could be, and what do you think, and what do you think your community needs. And so that's one thing that we've really tried. Right now we're coordinating an event in a community where we're trying to really harness the sponsorship of a public health organization that is really active in the community, and a community association that is also really active and really understands our target audience. And so part of that is coming to them and saying, here are the event strategies. What do you think, and how should we change this? And through really creating your objective, your target audience, and your proposed outcomes, you have a very clear and concise product that you can take to people and say, here's what we're going to do. And that helps with recruitment, and that helps with receiving financial and partnerships, because people want to know the what and the why, but they want to know how. Like, how are you going to create this event? How are you going to call people in? How is this really going to work? So yeah, I really look forward to your questions, and thank you so much for having me.
Great, thanks so much, Nora. So as was mentioned, we're going to collect your questions. If you haven't already sent any in, then on the bottom left of your screen, you'll see a Q&A box, and you can just type those in, and we'll get to those a little later on. Now I'm going to introduce Adrienne to tell us a little bit about her work with their candidate forum that she was involved in. Adrienne?
Great, thank you so much. And first of all, I just want to thank UCS for putting this on, and for really giving all of us the resources to try and start more grassroots advocacy. I would like to highlight that I'm by no means an expert, and I think we're all learning together. So I'm really excited to hear from you, whether it's during the Q&A today or afterwards. If you have any questions or ideas, I'm happy to chat online or offline as well. So thank you all for joining. I think this is really exciting. So I am a member of the Concerned Scientists at Indiana University, and I'll give you just a really brief background on who we are, and then I'll focus on one event that we held this spring that we think was really successful. So the Concerned Scientists at IU is a grassroots, nonpartisan, informal coalition of faculty, students, and community members. We're not officially affiliated with Indiana University, but we do have a lot of members in our group that are a part of Indiana University. So we're here in Bloomington, Indiana, and we're really working to promote the scientific enterprise both in Indiana and regionally, nationally, and globally. And we aim to protect the scientific process, scientists, and facts in general. And we're trying to elevate the role of scientific research and evidence in policymaking. And so really, one of our goals has been to bring science and science policy into the political discussion, both in terms of policymaking, but also having our politicians recognize that that science has an important role in the job that they're doing in making policy. And so one of the events that we put on this spring was to have a candidates forum for our U.S. House of Representatives district. And I think it was really successful. So I'd like to share a little bit about how we organized that, and hopefully some of the things that we learned along the way might be relevant to some of the events that you all are hoping to plan. So first, the general goal again was to elevate the role of science and science policy into the discussion both of candidates and then politicians after they're elected in the jobs that they're doing. And so our goal was not to have them debate how climate change works, what the science is behind some of the environmental and other challenges that our country is facing, but rather thinking about the connections between science and policy. So I think one of the challenges often is that politicians are generally not scientists and don't have a strong science background, and they shy away from engaging with scientists. And so we wanted to be very clear at the from the beginning that we don't expect them to be able to explain climate change science to us, but we would like them to engage in a discussion of how we should make climate policy, for example. So we had twofold goals. One was to educate the voters about how the different candidates had, how the different candidates perceived science and science policy. And then also to show the candidates that their constituents value this. And by showing up to a candidates forum, that the candidates were going to have to respond to their constituents. And so that's sort of the first of UCS's 5 bullet points, right? So those were our goals. I'm really going to highlight number 2, building a compelling program. But before I get to that, I'll touch on the other 3 as well. So the third bullet point that we learned about earlier is to be inclusive. And so one of the ways that we did this is that we wanted to be inclusive of all of the candidates that were running from both parties. So we ended up having 3 Democrats that were running to challenge the Republican incumbent. We did schedule the event so that it was at a time when the Congress people would be back in their home districts so that the incumbent could participate if he chose. He decided not to attend, but he was invited. So we invited all the candidates, and we reached our broad network of our listserv and other networks that each of our members is a part of locally to try and get as inclusive a participants as possible. And so number 4, successful recruitment. We have an extensive listserv with hundreds of members. So that was the main way that we reached out. We've also found that Facebook is fairly effective for us. And having other people reach out to their other networks was also useful. And then in terms of follow-up, one thing that was very successful is we had a live stream on Facebook of our event, which was then archived and was viewed hundreds, if not, I think, thousands of times, which is pretty impressive. And then we also had so the event was held at the local library, and the local library has a television cast that we were able to share with our members as well. So now I want to focus on how we built a compelling program and maybe some take-homes that you all can extend to your events down the road. So first, we really wanted to match the content with our goals. And so number 1, we wanted to show the candidates that participated in the forum that the constituents care about, that this is important, that our future representatives need to be thinking about science policy to address their constituents' concerns. And so I think that some of the details of our event were actually pretty important. So number 1, the room where it was held, we spent some time thinking about this, especially since we don't have formal funds. We were trying to look for somewhere that was either free or relatively cheap to rent out. And we were able to use a room at the public library that held I believe approximately 150 people. We weren't sure exactly how many we were going to get in terms of attendance, but we looked at other similar forums that had been held recently, and we thought we might get somewhere between 100, maybe 150. And it turns out that we had a sold-out crowd, and we actually had to turn people away at the door. And I would suggest to try and find a room that will look full. So if there's a room that, if you're really not sure how many people are going to come, there's a room that you can kind of adjust the seating, I think it's pretty discouraging when you have a room that looks majority empty. Even if it's effective for the participants that came to the event, it can be a little bit discouraging for morale. So I think being thoughtful about the room, and then we're also thoughtful about the date, making sure that there weren't conflicts across town, and also a date where the incumbent could participate in this forum. And also matching content to our second goal, which is to educate the voters. And so what we did was we have a subgroup within our Concerned Scientists at IU group that works on legislative affairs. And so that subgroup got together and brainstormed some different questions to propose to the candidates during the forum. And those were vetted within the subgroup, and then they were vetted within the steering committee, and then eventually given out to everyone on our listserv for comments. After we had agreed on a set of, I believe, 7 questions, after that whole process was done, we then gave those to the candidates in advance. So I believe they had several weeks before the forum to actually look over the questions and review them as they would like to. And then we also had an opportunity for the audience members to write down questions on note cards, pass them to some volunteers in the audience that were part of our group, and then we would sort of vet them as vet the audience questions. So having participation from the audience, but that's somewhat filtered, as well as pre-prepared questions, I think was really effective. And so I will wrap up now, and I'm really excited to take any questions. The only thing that I would say is that I think the tone that we were trying to convey was also important, and that we weren't trying to be grilling these candidates about specific science policy, but more celebrating science and really reinforcing the importance of bringing science to the table and evidence-based decision making. So thank you all for your time, and I look forward to speaking with you further.
Thanks so much, Adrienne. So I really appreciated hearing from both Nora and Adrienne. Really briefly, a couple of things that stood out to me from what they both shared. Writing down your goal and your target audience and the outcomes that you want, and then knowing that that will shift over time, and that's okay. That's a really good reminder. And also being inclusive, not only with who you're reaching out to in advance and building trust in a relationship, but also inclusive of the target audience too. And what Adrienne said about inviting all candidates, regardless of party, to a candidate forum is really important, and especially for it to be totally nonpartisan and have science at the forefront, and not driving a particular agenda. You want to make sure that you invite all candidates and you time it in a way so that all candidates, including the incumbent, are at least have the potential to come. They may or may not choose to come if you're doing a candidate forum, but you want to open that door for them anyway, which is why August is a really great time if a candidate forum sounds exciting to you. If there are multiple people vying for your House seat or your Senate seat where you live, August is the time when everyone in Washington, D.C. goes home all around the country, and that's partly for political reasons because they want to be out and about and meeting their constituents as they get closer to Election Day in November. So couple of things to wrap your head around. Soon we'll put up a poll for you to tell us what you're excited about doing, and we're really curious to hear from you. There are a wide range of events that you could choose to do. A candidate forum is a great idea. You may want to do a letter writing party and then, deliver letters on an issue that you care about to your representative's office. Maybe there's a film that you think is really compelling on an issue that you are passionate about. You could host a film screening and a discussion. Maybe you're a scientist and you want to teach people about the way that science informs policy and host a brown bag or invite other scientists to come and speak. Really, the sky is the limit, and we're making a big push for any kind of Science Rising event this August. Gives you a good amount of time to start planning ahead. Like both Nora and Adrienne said, a good event takes a little bit of legwork in advance and time for you to think about your goals and what you want it to look like. And so no matter what type of event you're interested in doing, we at the Union of Concerned Scientists want to support you in that. So we have some resources to help you get started. There's the Science in Action Toolkit, some specific guides like how to host a letter writing party, and the checklist for planning an event that you should see next to the Q&A at the bottom of the screen. So I encourage you to download those and make use of them. And I'm really excited about Science Rising because I think we're going to see a drumbeat of public actions happening around the country, people raising their voices to stand up for science in far more places and in far more creative ways than those of us working at UCS could ever do on our own. I'm really excited to hear what you want to do wherever you live that I never would have thought of. And to use your voice as a constituent is so important because you have representation in Congress as well as the state and local level. And so your voice matters. And if you bring out folks in your community, you can amplify that so much more. And as we get closer to the election, it's really critical that we hold anybody who wants to represent us at whatever level of government, hold them accountable on issues like climate change, support for science, whether that be funding the Environmental Protection Agency or protecting scientists whistleblowers, and also just protecting our public health and safety as well. So I'm really excited to see what happens around the country. So we're going to get our poll started. There's a few questions, and we'll give you time to answer them one by one. So the first question, we're curious about what type of events you are most interested in organizing. And you can choose more than one. And like I said, a candidate forum is great. A letter writing party, you can check out the UCS website for the latest policy happenings, things that are coming up for a vote in Congress if you need inspiration for what to ask people to write letters about. Hosting a film screening is a really, really great idea for teach-ins, especially if you want to bring in a scientist or a politician or a policy expert to talk about how these issues affect your community, or if you have other ideas coming to mind. All right. Thanks for those of you that have already participated. We'll give you just a few more seconds. So if you haven't answered this question, go ahead and do that. All right. Thanks, everyone. It's exciting to see. And now we're going to go to our second poll question. So we're wondering how many hours you are willing to spend organizing an event. So, you heard a couple of great examples from Nora and Adrienne. Your event could be big or small. So just let us know what range you're in, an hour, 4 to 5 hours, or if you're all in and you can commit to 10 or more hours for whatever your Science Rising event will be. Let us know. All right. few more seconds, so go ahead and choose one if you haven't yet. And whatever you tell us you're interested in, we will be following up afterwards. So especially if you say, yes, I'm excited, I want to do a Science Rising event, then we will be in touch in the next couple of days to help you get started. All right, so thanks for everyone filling out this poll question. I'll go to the next one now. So we're also wondering what issues you are most interested in organizing an event around. And this is another question where you can choose more than one. So maybe your site's about injecting science into the midterm elections. If you're interested in sustainable farming and food security, things like SNAP benefits, nutrition assistance for folks, defending our fuel economy standards, which, like Joanna said, is the most significant rule we have on the books for dealing with our greenhouse gas emissions, our climate pollution. The next choice is ensuring that federal agencies like the EPA and Department of Energy have the funding that they need to do their jobs. And finally, defending science-based public protections such as clean air, drinkable water, and protection from toxic chemicals. And you don't have to limit yourself to just one issue. So if you haven't yet, go ahead and fill this out in a few more seconds. Great to see these rolling in. See, everybody's still clicking, so I'll give you a little more time. Okay, great. Thanks, everyone. So now we'll go to our next question. So this is a big one. Are you interested in hosting an event this August recess? So let us know if you're interested or not, or if you're thinking maybe. And for those of you that are, we'll be following up very soon to help you think through that. And when we close out of the polls, you'll have access to those tools that I pointed out earlier too. So if you're ready to plan an event and you didn't click on the toolkit yet, don't worry, you'll have another chance. All right, if you haven't selected an answer yet, please do in the next few seconds so we can move on to our question and answers with the crew. Great. Thanks so much, everyone. All right. So let's take some of those great questions that you've been sharing with us for our presenters. If you haven't had a chance yet, please submit your question in the question box at the bottom left of your screen. And let's see, we'll start here with one for Nora about reaching out to local teachers. Is it doable to ask a school district to hand out flyers? Are flyers effective? What do you think?
Sure. So teachers as our target audience has been one of the hardest ones to really penetrate, I will say, because they are so busy. Teachers work all the time and they really want an event served to them on a platter because they don't have time to really work through things with you. So one thing that we've found to be really effective is looking at the events within our community where we know teachers are going to come and where we know they'll be free to talk to us for a few minutes. We don't really want to intrude on them when they're in classes or walking out to their cars or in the middle of their really hectic schedules. So one thing that was that really helped us to get started with that was in Milwaukee. Every year for the last 6 years, we have an environmental schools consortium. So it's schools within our community that are working to make their schools more sustainable. And so every year they have a conference. And teachers come and principals come, and a lot of people who are higher up, especially within the public school community, come. And it's a chance where teachers are not required to talk to anyone, and they can just really engage in workshops, and it creates a really positive environment where we can approach them. So we went to that within our first year of becoming a nonprofit, and that really connected us to Milwaukee Public Schools. And so when looking for teachers, I would say just keep in mind that kind of hold yourself from really requesting a lot from them and frame it more as we want to provide you this product, this opportunity. There's a little bit more tediousness when you want to include something else on their to-do list, I would say. Yeah. Thank you.
All right, Adrienne, let's see, I had one for you here. Sorry, got a lot of questions coming in. So where did that go? I apologize. Well, I don't know if either one of you can jump in on this one. Do you have experience with planning events in rural areas? We have folks in Texas. I know there's a question, Adrienne, about working kind of a conservative state or a state that can be conservative. Do you have any guidance on that?
Sure. So that's a thing that we're trying to get better at, and it's definitely a challenge. So with regards to Indiana being a conservative state, a little geography, very true, Indiana's conservative state. Bloomington, where we're based, is sort of a very faded blue little bubble. So we're definitely living in more of a liberal, progressive area surrounded by much more conservatism. And so one of our goals that we've been somewhat successful at is reaching out to the more conservative and the more rural areas. One thing that we've done that has been really effective is Bloomington has a great farmers market, and we set up a table every Saturday and have some fun geology rocks and some cool little physics shows that will just engage the kids usually, and then their parents come along and we can engage them with more discussion about science and science policy. And so one thing that I think you could do in more rural areas is do something similar where there's not a big investment. Get a table, get a few resources. You don't need a lot of organization up front. You don't need a lot of people. So any sort of events, if there are state, county fairs, I think that's a good place to start. I would say overall, starting small, any little bit helps. I think something I've been struck with in the last year is how sort of low the threshold for engagement is, and that even my friends that are, thoughtful scientists, I realize they're not even voting. So even just getting people to do the first small step, I think, is a huge thing. So don't be discouraged by being in maybe a more conservative place or a rural area where you might have not as much access to resources. I think also connecting with things that are already going on in rural areas. So if there's any sort of science, whether it's working with the schools or any sort of other outreach that you can connect with so you don't have to build your own network, I think is the place to start.
One thing that I would just supplement with is that a lot of the organizations that are working in more populated areas, they really want to expand out. I know that that's really has been on our to-do list for a long time, and so one way that we do that is just by contacting community groups in smaller towns outside of Milwaukee. And so it could be useful if you have a larger populated area, like within like 1 or 2 hours, reach out to a few of those organizations and you can utilize their resources.
Great. Adrienne, on the question about how do we get college students to turn out, and of course, we're now entering the summer season. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think it is trickier during the summer, but thinking more broadly during the school year, I think that sometimes college students are maybe underestimated, and I think there's a lot of really active, really eager to learn more about these issues and to become more involved, especially within the last year or two. So I think number one, just have faith and really try and access those populations. Obviously, we're in a college town, so we have great access to students. And I think that's something that's been helpful for us is getting students to get other students involved. Students are looking for not just more homework, but more social educational opportunities. So the more that you can combine something fun that they can do with their friends, maybe make a pizza party that they also come and learn about some issue. Free food is always a winner, and you don't have to spend too much money on it. So we've done, Jimmy John's sandwiches, pizza and drinks, and a few cookies. Actually, at our candidates forum, we did it was kind of a fun little potluck where people did a potluck of desserts. And so I think the more that you can combine fun and activism and education all together, students are often, especially at big schools, are often looking to make connections with their peers and are looking for some sense of community. So the more that you can foster that within your broader goals, I think the more successful you're going to be. And then I think secondarily, getting students that come to the first event to become even more involved. I think that sometimes requires somebody that's maybe they could look up to as a mentor to kind of pull them along. So I know one of the faculty members that started our group here in Indiana, he kind of pulled me along, and I don't know that I would have had the confidence to think that I could do anything meaningful if he hadn't just kept pestering me to come to the meetings, and then here I am. So I think if you are maybe a potential mentor, encouraging students to come along and reminding them that they do have a voice and that it's an important voice to be heard. I think in the summer it can be challenging, but using the platforms that students are using is important, and that's something that I'm still trying to learn what 18-year-olds are doing. But using social media, also we've postered a lot, so we print out color sheets, 8.5 by 11 color sheets that advertise our events. And undergrads have gone around to the dorms, to the dining halls, and have postered really effectively. And I know that a lot of students ended up showing up to our events because of that. So those are a few hopefully helpful suggestions.
Or do you want to add anything to that?
I think she covered it.
Yeah, I think so too. We had a question about finding spaces that are available especially for candidate forums, when I guess there's libraries in some states that don't allow that.
Sure.
What are spaces that you would suggest that don't cost much, that are good for these kinds of events?
So one thing that we've utilized is libraries, which you already mentioned there, but another space we've kind of looked into is more like communities, like where they're a lot of communities in Milwaukee will have like kind of like a hub, like a neighborhood association where they might have like a food pantry or a number of other services in one place. And so we're actually hosting a LED event at one of those spaces next month. And so the other thing I will speak to is that you can sometimes utilize a tax-exempt nonprofit to sponsor you for your event. And then a lot of times, a lot of these resources are much cheaper. So once we received our tax-exempt status, one of the spaces that we were looking at for a particular kickoff event for the organization, which was kind of like a little bit more of like a party feel, the cost of it went, the cost of the rental space was cut in half. So looking into people that can become your sponsors is a really strong way of, one, making those connections, and two, kind of creating those like partnerships where they might provide the costs for that space if you provide something else. So just something to think about.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I see somebody in the comments suggested bars, and that came up in my head as well. So depending on what type of forum you're having, if it needs to be a quiet place, that might not be the best scenario, but sometimes bars will have an actual separate meeting room. So bars, coffee shops, other sort of community venues, I think can be really effective. And to kind of follow up on what Nora had said, that I think a lot of times organizations that might have some funds are actually looking for something to do. And if you have the energy and can maybe co-sponsor with them, they might be able to provide some of the funds for a place or even a location themselves. We have a great science museum in our town, and they have a great meeting space. So
yes,
museums, science museums, or even art museums, other community spaces that are really looking to promote the community at large, even if it's not specifically related to science, I think is a good place to start. And don't be afraid. We were very lucky. We got a great space for our event, and I highlighted that I think that was important. But if you don't have a perfect spot, do it anyways, and it will be great.
Awesome. So what can someone like a high schooler do? Nora, we got this question from someone who's like, a high school student wants to do something but doesn't feel like they're ready to take on a community event.
Yes. Okay. So we actually have some high schoolers on our team, and generally what we've kind of worked with on that level of, they come to our meetings, and just a comment on our spaces. We really have to strategize to make sure that our spaces are for people who aren't 21. So sometimes that can be hard, but sometimes there are, so like we first kind of were introduced to this because one of our speakers at the March for Science that we hosted here was a high schooler. And so his parents kind of got involved and were really excited about his involvement with our team. And so sometimes it takes just like reaching out to an organization and saying, hey, I want to work with you. What do I need to accomplish that? Another comment that I'll make on that is I would reach out to an organization that is a more well-established organization. A lot of times working with people who are not 18, it introduces a lot of insurance costs for organizations. And so sometimes the organizations who aren't as well established won't have those channels open yet because it takes a little bit of time. So working with like a national organization is a really good way to start. The other thing that I'll say is like if you're looking to like do something within your school, I would really try and identify and tap like a few champions. Like who are your teachers who really pay attention, who are ones that really kind of like lift you up and are willing to like to take you to the next point where they like your ideas and can help you create that process. I think that sometimes it's hard if we don't really know who to reach out to. And so really identifying like a handful of people where you're like, hey, I have this idea. Can you help me? I think that's a really good way to start. Oh, I have a cat who just came to say hi. Sorry.
Cats, high schoolers, wide open.
Yeah, totally open. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that so one other thing that we've done is we've started, we actually have a high school intern, and the way that we did that is we kind of put together paperwork for that student's parents and just said, hey, this is what we expect. Can you co-sign on this? So that way, we feel like we have this established partnership where it's okay that she comes to our events and things like that. So sometimes it helps to like utilize the adults around you to like create those connections so that way you can work for the organizations that you want to work for.
And I would just add one more thing is I think all that is great, Nora. And as a high school student, all of you that are high school students or connected to high school students, I think that as we've seen in some other political arenas, of course, school shootings unfortunately come to mind, but I think that often, although you don't have a vote, I think your voice is often stronger. And I think a very compelling message to older adults is, look, the situation that you put us in, and this isn't just, and so now I'm going to raise my voice as a 14-year-old, 15-year-old, 16-year-old, and you have a responsibility as a voter to protect me, and protect my environment, and protect my rights as a constituent. So I think that oftentimes high schoolers are more powerful in terms of their voice, and from my experience, way smarter than me. So I think they have a lot to offer.
I mean, one general theme in all of our work is that we tend not to realize the power that we have in all of this. So one other question I want to just follow up on, somebody asked about organizing Diana asked about organizing candidate debates and finding questions that you can ask candidates for, whether for state, House and Senate candidates or federal candidates. UCS is developing a list of questions around promoting science in the elections that we will be happy to share with folks. And we have folks here that can help you in thinking about, how you might craft that. So if that's of interest to you, let us know. We will definitely be happy to hook you up with those. And then we had some questions about social media and sort of how using social media in this day and age is kind of a, maybe it's helpful, maybe it's a good space to create kind of conversation. I would just let you all riff, for a minute on that if either of you have thoughts.
Yeah. So one thing that we really utilize social media in our practices. And cat number 2. Sorry. And the way that we've used it in the past. So for the March for Science, the ways that we've that we really tried to get support is we kind of had a few spokespersons that were kind of like the initial people who were always on our page. And so we usually had like 4 to 5 people who were taking care of our page. So that way the responses were consistent. Another thing that really has come as like a really cool tool for us is when we have an event that we're anticipating to be larger. So, for example, we had a STEM and Style event where we were featuring women in our community who are in STEM and are partnering in a really strong way. And so one thing that we did prior to that event, because we were expecting around 200 to 300 people, was to host a Q&A. So we hosted a Q&A on our page about, what is this event about and where can you get information and what types of cool activities are we going to have. And one thing that really that we've utilized, and I encourage people to also use this strategy of having people within your organization watching the stream and posting questions. Because a lot of times people are kind of afraid to ask questions or they don't really know. So it can help to have a few staged questions just to make sure that the information that you want to put out there is put out there. Trying to think of other ways we've live streamed some events as well, and that has been great. And I would also say if you're doing like a panel talk or a candidate type of event, that's a perfect opportunity to live stream. I think that people could really find value in that. So, yeah.
So I know that we've gone a little over time. For anybody who does have to jump off, don't worry. We will be sharing the recording and all the resources with you by email afterwards. But we'll take a couple more questions. I just want to note that we got a lot of folks who are interested in holding a teach-in or an educational event as part of their kind of next steps. Do either of you have thoughts on how to make a teach-in or an educational event part of sort of a larger advocacy effort, or kind of link it in with a follow-up action, or kind of how do you make that into more than just a, bring people in, raise awareness, and then they all go home?
Yeah, so I think, again, starting at sort of thinking about trying to lower the activation energy for people that are somewhat involved, somewhat interested, but don't know how to take the next step. And so giving some basic resources that maybe aren't too overwhelming, and focusing on one thing that they can do in the short term, but that maybe has a broader context, so that if they get more interested down the road, they can continue to follow up. So I think identifying an issue that is, going back to those 5 bullet points, right? Identifying an issue that's important to whoever your target audience is, whether that's local or regional or federal. And giving them some concrete tools during that teach-in, and then some basic things of having a letter writing party right afterwards, even just having postcards that then maybe you can bring up to your local congressional office, maybe even having different levels of engagement, right? So it could be like, okay, you have to run off, but here, write this postcard. Can you stay for another half an hour? Let's work on crafting letters to the editor, sort of a different series of things that they could get involved in. And then I think following up with those people afterwards to both share how successful it was. So if you're able to deliver a stack of postcards to Congress people, sharing with them what the response was, hey, we delivered them today, etc. And here's the next step that you could do either on your own, or here's our next teach-in next month. So remembering that every small step is important.
All right. Well, thank you all for your time. Thank you both for sharing many insights and kind of a lot of things to think about for our folks who are going to be planning some events. It was a pleasure to chat with you. Thanks to all of you for joining this, spending a part of your day with us. Be sure to check out some of the resources. They're in the middle bottom of your page. There's especially a checklist for planning an event that'll be a great resource as you start to think about how to structure your events. We will be sending all of that after this event. We'll be sending additional resources by an email tailored to what you've told us about your ideas and following up to support you as you go. Don't hesitate to continue to send us questions and let us know what you need to have events that make an impact. We'll be excited to be a part of that with you. So thanks again, and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.